Yeah. Hi, Bruce. Hi, Tara.
Hello, Vijay.
Good to see you, Bruce.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
Yeah, hi, everyone.
Just hold on. Just mute yourself. Let me just introduce you, and then you can jump in. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll be getting started in about a minute. All right, Ram, it looks like we are on the hour. Do you want to get us started today?
Yep. Okay, hi. We have what? Yeah, roughly over about 60-odd people now. So this number will keep growing. Hi, today I have great pleasure in introducing, first of all, a subject which I think is somewhat different from the normal subjects that we cover, which are more in the area of coaching, adding more knowledge, taking people to mastery, transformation, and so on and so forth, which is primarily in the space of sharing wisdom from experts as well as for learning purposes. But today, it's that, plus, in my opinion, it's going to open a pathway for many of you in terms of your business, in terms of business development. Way back several years ago, when I was still an executive and a consultant in Singapore, I came across this trend where there were many people from outside of the legal field who were getting into mediation. And there were architects, there were people who were programmers, who were consultants, all kinds of people. And they were making quite a bit of money in terms of their mediation work over and above whatever they were doing. And that's been sort of working on my background mind for a long time. And when I became a coach and I met, we knew Tara and her mother, both of them lawyers. Her mother is a very, very renowned lawyer. And they went into mediation. This was something which I had been trying to get them to look at, that why can't people who are not lawyers be also considered favorably for mediation? May not be always be possible, but it's certainly something that is happening in the rest of the world as well. I personally think that coaches are uniquely qualified to be mediators because many of the competencies of mediation are very, very similar to that of coaching, especially in terms of communication, in terms of creating awareness and so on and so forth, and getting people together. And that is what today, an absolute expert master in this field, Bruce Edwards, is going to talk to you about. He is a globally renowned mediator as well as a mediation trainer who's been running an extremely successful program from California. And he has partnered with Tara Ollapally and their camp, which is a center for mediation. And they will introduce themselves in more detail and carry on with what they want to convey to you. And Vijay is, she has done her coaching from Coacharya. She's a master coach, MCC, and she also happens to have a legal background, but that was not the main reason why she went and qualified herself as a mediator, because of her interest in that space. So she's one of the few coaches that we have who, incidentally, I also happen to be a mediator, but then I'm not a lawyer. So Vijay has a stellar career from Hindustan Lever in HR. She's a lawyer as a background, and she's a coach as well. So she is going to be representing the coach's face in this conversation, dialoguing with Bruce and Tara. Tara would explain to you how exactly we would be later initiating a program, which is a mastery webinar early next year, which Vijay would be conducting with help from Bruce on behalf of CAMP, so that more coaches can be trained and they can be internationally be credentialed. So I will share you the details, and later you can always mail Magda. She will also be sending out information on this. So with that, I'll stop. As always, request all of you to sign into the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Coacharya, as well as our forum.coacharya, where you can put in your questions and watch the video broadcast of this. And Tara, Bruce, Vijay, they will step in and answer from time to time whatever questions you may have. So with that, I'll stop, hand over to Bruce, Tara, and Vijay to continue the conversation. Thank you. All yours.
Yeah, thank you, Ram. For that very generous introduction. But as you rightly said, I think we would like to take a minute, probably, in just introducing ourselves in the context of mediation, why this is important to us, and what place it holds for us in our lives. Bruce, would you like to go first?
That's a tall question, but thank you for both of you for the kind introductions. My day job is as a full-time mediator. And so for the last 30 years, I've helped develop the largest mediation company in the United States. And along the way, every day, been involved in mediating disputes. And in my free time, I teach mediation skills to lawyers and judges and non-lawyer professionals, not just in the United States, but in many places around the world. I've taught mediation in almost 25 countries now, and I'm just delighted to have the opportunity to share some of my thoughts and experiences with people on the webinar and call and answer questions that people have today to increase everybody's appreciation and understanding for what is still somewhat of a new process around the world.
Right. Tara, would you go next? Tara seems to have frozen. Okay, so we'll just wait for Tara to jump back in. Ram, is there a way you can just reach out to her and just let her know that she's...
Connect her on phone, but in the meantime, you please carry on.
I will, right. So I think Ram rightly said, I am sort of, a little bit here, a little bit there. Certainly nowhere in comparison to Bruce as a mediator. But I just want to bring in the angle as to why this plays a part in my life today. Most of you, I was just looking into the people logging in. I know a whole lot of you personally, and some of you I've heard of in the coaching fraternity. So one of the reasons I think coaching is important to me is because I think it is a business of hope. It is a hope for a better tomorrow, and I think a better future. Creating something better for ourselves and really maximizing our potential. So in a very similar way, I think mediation also to me represents hope for a better tomorrow. And I think just going beyond conflict and in fact creating something wonderful from conflict. And certainly I think my first exposure to mediation was way back when I was a 20-year-old in law school, where it was one more way to resolve disputes. It was a method of dispute resolution, and that's the way we were introduced. But I think it obviously was not as glamorous as I think more of the mainstream's way of resolving disputes, which is litigation and otherwise. So it never featured, I think, in sort of my path for a very long time. And quite recently, and I think thanks to Ram, when he had this very similar conversation saying that, aren't we coaches in a good position, good place to sort of look into this and build on this? I thought this is fantastic because this was one of those things that I had paused many, many years ago. And I think I'm still in a space of learning and curiosity. And as I discover more, I see so much of the synergy come into play. And we'll talk about it a little bit more as we go into the webinar. But I think that's what mediation means to me.
Yeah, don't worry about Tara joining in. Let her join in whenever. In terms of the program and all that, I would be able to add value as well. Bruce, if you want to take over, start from now. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Bruce, if I may, I just, one of the things we wanted to do, now that we've talked about, why we are here. Hey, Tara's back. Okay. Welcome back, Tara. So you just sort of frozen for a couple of minutes. So we were just, Tara, maybe you should just go off video. If you have a bandwidth issue, maybe you should just go off video.
Yes, hopefully this will be better.
So we were just getting done with our introductions and, telling the audience here as to why we are here and what brought us to mediation. So your turn, Tara.
Oh, wonderful. It looks like my timing is just perfect. I apologize for technological issues that I've been facing. But quickly to introduce myself, I'm Tara. I'm co-founder of CAMP, which is a private mediation institution that's seeking to promote private mediation. I am a lawyer by training. I started off my career as a human rights lawyer. And although I come from a strong rights-based mindset, being in the field of mediation now for the past 5 years has totally transformed the way I view and approach disputes. Hopefully during the course of the next 90 minutes, we will have the chance to share more about individual stories and, of course, learn from Bruce Edwards, the master of it all, on how mediation works and what the larger scene of mediation is from a global perspective, from an Indian perspective, and hope all of you will understand the value of this process even more. So thank you, and again, apologies for the technological glitch.
Sure, Tara. Thanks so much for that. So here is an invitation. Everyone, you've heard us talk about what brought us here. Quickly in the chat box, if you can maybe just put down and, before Bruce takes over from here to deep dive us into mediation, what thoughts as you signed up for this webinar? What were you expecting? What are you curious to know more about? What do you want to take away? That'll be fantastic. So we'll check into what's coming on the chat box. But while we are at it, maybe you should just, would you like to start, Bruce?
Sure, I'd be happy to start. And thank you again for all the kind words, everyone. As I think about who the audience is today, I agree with Ram, certainly, that one of the many benefits of mediation competency is I think it does align very clearly with many of the competencies in the coaching world. And we hope to talk more about that as we move forward. Vijay, listening to your comments, I want to follow along because as with a new audience, I wasn't sure how far to go into the philosophy of what it is that we do and why we do it. But clearly, in my work, both teaching mediators around the world and other mediators within the United States, a big part of my philosophy is that one, these are skills that are extremely important. They're necessary for our world going forward. Lawyers and judges and people with legal training do not and should not have a monopoly on dispute resolution skills. As I've said, our problems are too vast. And frankly, I've been to India now 3 times training judges and lawyers. So I know this is true in India, certainly true in the United States and many other countries. Our judicial system is adept at dealing with certain types of disputes, but not all of them. And as we move into the sort of 21st century, the kinds of problems that confront us are those that transcend borders. The bigger issues of migration, the bigger issues of wealth disparity, of disease, of climate change, all of these are the kinds of problems that are not going to be dealt with by building walls. And we need to find better ways to relate with each other in coaching moments, in mediation moments, and in other moments where we reach to find our better selves and try and resolve disputes without resort to violence, sometimes even without resort to courts. So that's my sort of philosophical background as I approach this, but delighted to talk about mediation and help people understand more about that process.
I can see some interesting expectations coming in the chat box. Clearly, there's this whole thing about, what is it about? What are the competencies? How do the skills complement with those of coaches? I think this whole thing about, while coaching is about coaching a person, is mediation a person or more than that? And also, as Ram suggested, I think there is an expectation about links to the training and credentials, and how do you add on to it onto a coach's business portfolio.
Okay.
I think, yeah, broadly that, and some expectation on principles of mediation and how do you apply it to coaching and also beyond all interpersonal relationships.
There's a lot to unpack in those questions. So let me start with the top first in terms of defining the process. And I think of the mediation as a placeholder on a dispute resolution continuum. If you get into a dispute with your spouse or your employer or your neighbor or, God forbid, a stranger, it's very typical for people to try and resolve those disputes themselves, not always successfully. And many people are able to, many people aren't. And there's lots of issues that get in the way of direct communication, as most of your coaches know, whether it's emotions or it's bias or it's lack of experience or language skills. There's a host of reasons why sometimes face-to-face negotiation, face-to-face dispute resolution is not the optimal answer. So as we move along the continuum, really the next stop is mediation. And mediation in its simplest form is a facilitated negotiation. And so I, as a mediator, would come in to a dispute with or without lawyers, work with the parties in a variety of different ways to try and get them to agree on an acceptable outcome to that dispute. And notice I didn't say, tell them what to do. We'll come back to the principles of mediation in just a moment. Continuing along the dispute resolution continuum, just to put things in context, people then can move on to more adjudicatory processes. They can go to arbitration, they can go to trial, they can take their case to appeal. These are all things that people are more familiar with in the legal setting. But mediation in the last 30 years has gained so much traction in the United States and other countries because of its many benefits. At its core, and my background, just to introduce, I had a background in psychology educationally before I went to law school. And it was really a stark dissatisfaction with how our law system dealt with human emotion and dealt with human conflict that led me to try and create a different way. And so 30 years ago, we tried to define a process that allowed for people to come together, to sort of share their experiences, sometimes in painful ways, certainly face-to-face in many instances. But working through that kind of a process, important things started to happen. People emotionally felt better for having been able to participate. They took responsibility for those decisions that impacted their lives going forward. And ultimately, they were able to resolve disputes in a fraction of the time, and oftentimes without the need of lawyers or lengthy legal proceedings. So the mediation process itself, I teach sometimes with a psychotherapist in Austria and in Europe. And one of the interesting things about that teaching experience as it relates to your audience here today, VG, is that he comes from a background of therapeutic science. And that background of therapeutic science is very aligned with coaching professionals. And we'll talk more about the competencies, as we move forward. But he's taught me an important thing, which is when you know why something works, it's easier to begin to understand how it works. And to understand the why it works in mediation is really to understand just the basic core principles of mediation. And the core principles are very few in this mediation process. It's a process that works because it's an interest-based process at its core, meaning the goal is to try and identify what underlies the disputes and to address those in meaningful and creative ways. And the second prong is that it respects the party's right to be involved. We call that self-determination, the right for people to take responsibility and ownership for those decisions that come out of conflict. And so in its simplest form, that's the why mediation works and works so brilliantly. From there, there's a whole host of trainings and certifications and competency developments that are available, as you know, and Camp has done training through Tara and her mom, Lila. We have an online platform called Edwards Mediation Academy with advanced and basic skill mediation courses. There's a host of learning and training that's available both online and in person in different parts of the world. But hopefully that gives people at least an introduction to what the mediation process is.
Yeah, sure, Bruce. I was just wondering if it was a good time to share those 2 slides, which gave an overview of how things moved ahead in the process. Just a quick overview.
Sure.
Should I share those slides?
That would be great. Then, if you want, I could comment on them and what the people are seeing.
Yes, please. Yes, please. I'm just going to get my screen shared. One moment, please. Is this visible?
Perfect.
The slide which says stages of mediation.
So let me observe what this is for a moment. Every conflict can be viewed in a number of different ways. From a teaching standpoint, I like to deconstruct a conflict into artificial stages. And deconstructing a conflict into artificial stages allows us to do several things. One, it allows us to predict the types of things that we are likely to see within those stages and prepare ourselves to be ready, if not fluid, in our response to those predictable and recurrent challenges. It also forces us as mediators or coaches, I think, to slow down, because one of the themes that I try and preach to mediation students is this importance of deceleration. And deceleration allows you to be thoughtful as you attend to the various stages and needs of people in the process. What do I mean by that? Let's look at this slide that's on the screen. There's a host of events and considerations that take place before people would walk into my office to try and resolve the dispute. We call that the pre-mediation phase. Sometimes it's referred to as convening or process design, as we involve the parties in designing a specific approach to that dispute resolution that meets the needs of their clientele. For example, if I'm mediating a case involving a priest who has abused a parishioner, I would probably design a different process than I would if I was mediating a dispute, as I did this week, between a large Chinese investor and his venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. But those are all pre-mediation considerations. Then people come together, ideally face-to-face in my office, and we engage in an opening process. That opening process traditionally involves everybody sitting across the table from each other. As I mentioned earlier, with my coaching assistants, guiding the parties through a dialogue about what led to that dispute, if appropriate at that point, even talking about suggestions for issues that need to be discussed during the day and potential solutions that might make sense. And as the day evolves, because these mediations oftentimes will fill the better part of a day, there begins a negotiation process. And I won't get into too much detail at the moment, but negotiation itself is a timeline and can be divided pretty easily into early, mid, and late stage negotiation with certain goals to be accomplished, certain characteristics to be identified, certain challenges to be predicted, and all of that is very clear within the mediation course. Ultimately, and in a perfect world, you get close to settlement and you send people out with a signed settlement agreement, or at least a handshake and an understanding. Sometimes, in many of my complex cases and disputes, There's work to be done after people leave the building. We call that the post-mediation phase, and it involves following up with parties, sometimes ensuring compliance, that they've lived up with the terms of the understanding and agreement. What you don't see on this screen are certain issues that will pretty clearly resonate with you as coaches, but they're issues that run throughout the entirety of the process. Communication, of course, being the big one. And so there are communication issues that run from the moment that people have begun contact with you to the moment that you conclude your discussion. There are issues involving emotions. There are issues that involve culture and bias. There are issues that potentially involve apology and forgiveness. Now you're seeing this on the screen, which identifies some of these issues that run through the process itself. There's one that's not on this, oh, there it is up at the top, which is ethics. And so mediators are trained in ethical behavior and what's appropriate coaching, what's inappropriate coaching, and behavior and negotiation. So a lot of these are not stages of mediation because they are commonplace from the beginning until the end, but equally important and central to what we do. So hopefully these two slides at least give you a little further visual illustration of both what that mediation process looks like, and then some of the topics that are ripe for deeper discussion.
Bruce, sorry to interrupt. Vijay, can you please put it on slideshow? The slides are not clear.
Okay. Better now?
Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
Please make sure that all the slides in future, they're all on the full slide.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
Only 2 slides.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, great. And when you want the poll, if you're ready for that, please let Magda know. She can put on the poll. Yeah.
Yeah,
sure.
Now is actually the time of the poll where we could ask the audience, the participants, with respect to which topic you would like Bruce to dwell a little bit more in detail. Communication, negotiation, emotions that come up and how it's handled in the mediation process, and the feedback process as well of the mediator, each other, the parties offering feedback as well through the process. We could spend another 10 minutes or so, depending on what audience are interested in, to hear more from Bruce on. So if you could please vote in, we can spend another 10 minutes on one of these specific topics.
So, Tara, while that is happening, there was something that I just wanted to share, since there were a lot of questions in the chat box about the parallels, right? So when you look at these stages of mediation, right, that Bruce spoke about, I see strong parallels with coaching. If you see the process of convening for the pre-mediation stage, I think all of us coaches know that a lot of time is spent in the chemistry or the exploration or the discovery session, where you are having, you're not just building trust and intimacy, but you're also gaining a certain commitment to the process, making the ground rules clear, the framework, understanding concerns. And the convening process is pretty similar. The only thing is, in the convening process, a difference I see is the presence of a lot many more stakeholders, and not just working with one client. And similarly, so the post-mediation stage, we all know as coaches that, you know, between sessions, once the coach, the client, and the coach leave the coaching table, right, leave the coaching session, a lot of the work happens after. So I see, you know, this approach of, you know, doing deconstructing into stages, very similar to the way we would actually understand coaching. Just wanted to share that analogy, and yeah, let's go back to the poll.
But Vijay, I think you've spoken like a well-trained mediator. Your observations are right on. A lot of what good skilled mediators do in the convening process is coaching individuals, be they lawyers and or clients, stakeholders, both to build trust and credibility and intimacy, to use your words, but they're accurate. And ultimately then trying to bring all those disparate threads together so that when people walk into the room together, they have the best chance of successful communication. And you're right, sometimes I may have 10 or 20 different stakeholders in a mediation. And so my coaching is spread amongst different groups as I try and work people toward preparation for that face-to-face meeting.
So the poll results seem to indicate that negotiation is a topic that the group would like to hear more about. So followed closely by emotions. Depending on the time that we have, we could perhaps focus on negotiation for 15 minutes. I know negotiation is a day-long training for you, Bruce. So we're gonna try to pack it in 10 minutes.
So let me try and handle both of those topics because they're somewhat evenly divided. And in mediation, when I teach, there is a danger in the world of mediation. In fact, there's a danger in the world generally, which is the danger lies in not knowing what you don't know. And I think that's nowhere more true than when we talk about emotions, because frankly, most people don't dwell on emotions. And in fact, historically, we've done a very poor job of educating ourselves and each other about the role of emotions in conflict. Nowhere is that more evident in my trainings. And the last 4 years, we've been working on this project in Rwanda and teaching mediators there and teaching people the role of emotion in conflict. When I'm talking to a sort of a post-genocide world, I tell people that if we can bring mediation skills and competency to the people of Rwanda, there's hope for other countries, around the world. But let's talk about emotion for just a moment, and then I will move on to negotiation. One of the principles of mediation itself is the role that emotion is allowed to play in the conflict. We know in the last 10 years from neurobiological research, particularly from magnetic resonance imaging, brain scans, that there are different centers of the brain that are activated during high emotion. We now know that the effort to separate cognitive thought from emotion is a false dichotomy. Yet for hundreds, if not thousands of years, as a human species, we educated ourselves in the fashion that those two could be different. Schools were intended to educate. Homes and churches were intended to develop the emotional side of individuals. Yet we've learned, particularly in the last 10 or 15 years, there is no cognitive thought that one can have without an emotional component attached. We now know more about how memories are coded in our brains that starts with the strength of emotion attached to that experience. It's why when you think back on your lives and you have strong memories dating from your childhood, they're usually attached to a very strong emotional event. On the positive side, maybe it was the day that your parents brought home a sibling from the hospital, or maybe it was a birthday party that was particularly special. On the negative side, maybe it was an illness you had, or maybe you got bit by a dog in the neighborhood and you can still remember all of the events surrounding that episode. But that's because the emotion is so tied to the cognitive moment in that event. And so in the mediation process, one of the many reasons, if not the central reason that it works, is from a psychological level, from an emotional level. It allows us to deal with what's real in our lives. And the face-to-face conversations, the coaching conversations, these are all ways to both, yes, get at the party's interests, but also at the same time, allow the opportunity for the emotion to rise to its appropriate place within that conflict. Because only when you deal with that emotion can you also then deal with the cognitive issues that are wrapped into the dispute itself. So I don't mean to stand on a soapbox too much, but I find that as I go around the world and I talk about mediation, particularly with lawyers who are poorly trained in emotional competency, starting with their own, there's a complete disconnect in terms of understanding and appreciating where emotions fit, in the world of conflict itself. So be aware of that. I'll take it one further step and then we can talk about negotiation. We now live in a world where we have just recently learned that it is possible for those involved in traumatic experience, emotional experiences, that has an impact on one's genetic makeup. And Trauma therapists will tell you that trauma itself can be passed through one's genes to people's offspring. So you now have a multi-generational impact of emotion and of trauma, which has incredibly profound implications for our world. If you think about 6 million Syrian refugees struggling to find safety and freedom, we're not just talking about what kind of issues are involved in their lives. We're talking about what impact it might have on their next generation. This is a conversation that I've had in training mediators in Rwanda, for example, to say you may have people in your disputes that aren't even aware that they're traumatized by their parents' involvement in the genocide. And yet as mediators, you need to be trained, as coaches, you need to be trained to both look for that and understand how to work with that when it presents itself. So that falls under the heading of not knowing what you don't know. And what I'm trying to do is just light the fuse of knowledge around some of these developing concepts. But as it relates to emotion, it's a profound conversation like negotiation we could spend hours talking about in more detail. But I will come back to that with regard to answering questions.
Bruce, there's an interesting comment, and I think we can talk a lot about it, but a quick sort of response from you. Manikantan asks, is mediator equal to lawyer plus emotions? My response to him was, how would you word that for a coach? But that's my response.
A good mediator is it depends on the context, because I should take a step back. Mediators have the opportunity to be involved in a variety of settings. In the United States, in India, you have community-based mediators who will be involved in partition actions, in divorce, in family issues, child custody. Certainly the area that I work is more commercial disputes, but you also have mediators that get involved in public policy considerations and broader issues. So I don't want to generalize too much, but the best mediators are those that obviously have good communication competencies we'll talk about. Typically it helps if they have some knowledge of the forum that they're in, meaning if they're in litigation, it's helpful to have some legal knowledge about what's involved in lawsuits and litigation. Absolutely, you have to be knowledgeable about psychology and emotions. Frankly, you have to be a kindergarten teacher some days to help people follow the clock and treat each other with dignity and respect, and a host of other sort of characteristics that I could describe to flesh out the qualities of the best mediators. But it is multifaceted, and the questioner is right. Being almost a therapeutic scientist or an emotional counselor is a huge part of what we do.
There's another question which has come in, but I just thought we should clarify that, Bruce. Motto, I don't know, obviously that's the name of the phone, so apologies for referring to you as Motto, has made a comment that typically in mediation, the opposing parties are always in different rooms, and the mediator does bridging. And goes on to say that the skill is, lies in being able to extract the extent of yield between the two parties. My own sense is many times equally so, the parties are together, right? And I think that is the challenge of the mediator, handling all the emotions and the different points of views.
So let's address that. And again, it's like so many of these questions, they raise important conversations that probably we're struggling to do justice with in a brief amount of time. But I would say this, the best mediators are those that have trained themselves in a variety of processes that they're equally complement to help coach and implement. So for example, the two that have come through your question, is mediation about starting with people in the same room, face to face, or is mediation about separating the sides and going back and forth to develop interests? There is no ultimate answer. The only wrong answer is the answer that's not thoughtful, that's not strategic, that's not discussed with the clients to meet their expectations. Those are the wrong answers. The right answer is that you have discussions with people, you try and offer suggestions, you give them advice and coaching on what type of process makes the most sense, and then you try it. And you're equally flexible, because if it's not working, you might need to go to a different process altogether. I will say this, And in my blog, I think I entitled it Chasing Dinosaurs at Edwards Mediation Academy, I go into a long discussion about the psychological background of parties in dispute and why historically we developed a process that as often as possible begins with people across the table from each other. And if you're a mediator who is defaulting to a process that starts with parties separated, I would just ask you to challenge your assumptions. Are you doing that for the right reasons? Are they thoughtful? Are they strategic? Or are you simply acceding to the wills of the lawyers or the stakeholders who may want to avoid the conflict because being face-to-face is challenging for most people? Or are you afraid of the emotion itself and your inability to handle it? Those are all important questions that you have to really examine and answer for yourself before you choose what's the right process. But everybody coming at this should know that the best mediators are those that are equally adept in a variety of different processes.
Maybe the right point for us to move into negotiation?
Yes, let's do that. So again, to define mediation in its simplest terms, it's a facilitated negotiation. And facilitated obviously speaks to the core competency of what you as coaches do. The negotiation piece obviously becomes a bit more involved. As I've already identified on the stages, negotiation itself is a process. And it begins and one that needs to be attended to at each step of the way. I think, again, oftentimes people look for quick solutions. And many of the mediator complaints that I have heard, both anecdotally and those that I've had to respond to within my own company, stem from mediators who like to rush through the process. Or in some settings, like courtroom settings, where court-annexed mediators are not given sufficient time to allow the process to work and therefore get into trouble. So the whole reason for deceleration and slowing down the stages is to be able to talk about each stage in turn. And that in turn allows us to identify the uniqueness of each stage in terms of what we're trying to accomplish, what those issues are that will arise, and what we can be prepared to do to overcome those challenges. So I'll give you an example. Obviously, negotiation itself, we describe as really the art of exploring what's possible. And yes, it's sort of developing options and it's trading interests and the logistical back and forth. But in its broadest sense, it's really keeping the dialogue moving forward, trying to investigate interests, trying to troubleshoot creative solutions, and ultimately trying to bring people together with a mutual understanding and agreement. In the early stage, to just sort of now begin with a little more of a defined conversation, in the early stage, the goal is simple. It's to get the negotiation started. That sounds simple on its face. But what happens when you come into the room and one size, like I had this week in this case involving this Chinese billionaire, and I asked his representative, I said, you know, what is it you want to try and accomplish today in this negotiation? And his response was, it's simple, Mr. Edwards. I want to humiliate my opponent. I want to ruin their reputation. And if possible, I want to put them through bankruptcy. Well, I've now learned a lot in that interest statement, but obviously I realize also I've got a long way to go in that negotiation process if I'm going to be successful. I know that the various challenges now in that early stage negotiation are helping to coach people so they don't begin the negotiation in a way that sends people running from the building. And so one of the predictable challenges in negotiation at the early stage is coaching people to start in a manner, both their narrative as well as their position, that assists the process in moving forward and doesn't cause it to stall out or worse because of the approach that they're taking or inclined to take. And so as an early stage of mediation, those are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about. And along the way, there's lots of different things that I attend to personally. In that early phase, for example, I have what I describe as the 80-20 rule. It's a communication device I use for myself to remind me that I should be listening to people 80% of the time in this early stage of the process. And I should be talking about 20% of the time. And if I'm not following that rule, then I better rein myself in a bit and be cautious about how I'm intervening with the parties at this stage. Am I moving too quickly? Do I have enough information? And maybe throttle back a bit to better listen to people at this early stage. And so that's how I think about the beginning stage. And as you move toward the middle stage, the goals change. The goals really are to both keep the process moving, keep the negotiation going, keep people invested even during dark moments. It's what I describe, the metaphor is sometimes when you're driving through Death Valley, California, and the temperature is 40 plus degrees centigrade, there's no hope in stopping. All you can kind of keep doing is driving forward and moving the parties forward. And sometimes I have to remind myself of that, even if there's no rest stop on the horizon for people. Just forward progress is all that we can aspire to. So in mid-stage, I'm at once trying to keep people moving. I'm listening a little bit less. Notice I said a little bit, maybe 50% of the time. I'm starting to, what I describe as mold in soft clay, potential settlement solutions that the parties might respond to. And so those are the kinds of things that I think about. But let me pause for a moment, just because I could continue with a discussion of these various stages, but I want to be responsive to those in your broader community and to address the kinds of issues that are important to them as well.
Bruce, there are a couple of questions coming about this whole thing of, somebody commented about win-win, right? And then that has, led to whether win-win is same as 50-50. And who decides what is 50? Is it the mediator? Is it the parties? The one thing, and Tara, and I'm sure Ram can also relate to this, the classic orange example comes to my mind.
Right.
Would you want to run them through that analogy?
Good. It is overly simplistic to think that every mediation will result in a win-win, or that win-win is defined as 50-50. If that were the type of outcome that was available, we could set up algorithms and we could have artificial intelligence in place of mediators. We're not there yet. That's a whole different conversation because there is some move in that direction. But to your point, Vijay, the classic example involving the orange is the brother and sister who are fighting over the orange. Mom comes into the kitchens to ask why is the screaming, and they both say they want the last orange. And as mom starts to ask questions and explore the underlying interests as to why they're fighting, it turns out that the son wants the orange to be able to scrape the peel and make cupcakes and needs the peel for his recipe. And yet the daughter wants to eat the orange, the fruit of the orange itself. And once mom realizes that these are the underlying needs, she has the obvious solution. She asks the children to skin the orange. The son gets the peel to scrape and use for his cooking. The daughter gets the opportunity to eat the orange and be satisfied, and everybody is happy, at least until the next brother-sister conflict. And so that's the classic example in mediation of trying to search for underlying interests. There is another discussion, though, that evolves from this, and I don't know if we have the slide, so I'll try and have everybody sort of visualize this in your head, but I think it's an important visualization. Draw a pie chart for yourselves in your mind, and the heading over the pie chart is decision-making criteria. What is it that influences our decision around a conflict? And then each slice of the pie represents the unique considerations that each of us might have in determining on what terms to resolve a dispute. And the slices of the pie are manyfold. They certainly start with the basic things we would all agree on. The facts of the dispute are an important consideration. If we were in a legal setting and listening to the lawyers debate the law and its application would certainly be an important consideration. And from there, it gets manyfold. Certainly emotions, as I've talked about, are different for different people. People's religious background, their principles, the amount of money they have or need, the influence they're getting from other stakeholders around them, be they family members, religious counselors, life experience is a slice of the pie that influences people's decisions. And I could go on. But the point in asking everybody to visualize this pie chart is that everybody's decision-making criteria is different, meaning the slices themselves are different and the sizes of the slice of that pie is different. Somebody, if you ask the lawyer in the room, please make a decision, half of that pie chart might be reflected by the facts and the law. Yet if you ask a stakeholder who's in that conflict, half of that pie chart might be their interest in parenting and the impact this dispute is having on their children. And that's what's going to ultimately influence their decision. The reason I go to the trouble of explaining this is you can have two different stakeholders in the same room. They will necessarily have two very different pie charts, which you could actually develop. I sometimes develop these on the whiteboard in a way of trying to both recognize and organize the parties' interests so they can help visualize what's driving their own decision. And at the end of the day, people are making decisions based on what's important for them, just like that brother and sister that I described. And when people make the decisions that are important for them, then it becomes a win-win because they're getting their needs and their interests satisfied. But it's not as simple as 50-50, and looking for 50-50 solutions not only doesn't do justice to the hard work that coaches and mediators engage in, but sometimes it leads you in the wrong direction in terms of the more intellectually honest need to try and explore these interests. Does that make sense?
Yeah, to me it did. I think so, yeah.
Good.
So I'm just wondering whether we should switch gears a little bit at this stage and go a little macro to, understand mediation as an industry, where things are headed, what's the kind of recognition, at what stage of growth it is, maybe an Indian perspective, Tara, and a US perspective, Bruce, and then we can come back into what everybody wants to know about the skills and competencies, mediators, coaches. Is there an interplay?
But I'd love to hear from Tara in terms of her recent assessment of things going on in India. That'd be delightful.
Absolutely. I think, when we started camp in 4 years ago, the phone calls would come in, and a vast majority of those calls were asking us about our meditation classes. We've had people coming in with their yoga mats, trying to figure out when they could do their meditation. People had absolutely no idea what mediation was. Today, the scene is different, and it's very exciting, at least in the Indian space. And I know it is similar worldwide with international conventions coming in to recognize the process, where mediation is a much more familiar term amongst disputants. We actually have people coming in and approaching us for mediation services even before they get to a lawyer, which is where the big change is. People are understanding that there's a better way to do it and they don't have to go through the courts and try using mediation. From the legal perspective, there have been so many changes that have taken place in India. There have been innumerable laws, at least 4 or 5 big laws that have been amended to recognize mediation. Commercial Courts Act has been amended to mandate mediation before you can file a case in the court unless you require urgent relief. Consumer Protection, Companies Act. The government is realizing, after all, we're a country with 30 million cases that are pending in our courts. It's going to take us over 250 to 300 years to be able to just clear our backlog. And as of yesterday, we've seen that one of the biggest political legal cases in our history, the Babri Masjid dispute, the parties have actually worked out a settlement agreement. So the scene is looking very, very positive for mediation in India. As I mentioned earlier, we have an international law that's recognizing mediation, and India has signed on to this, which means that's another big impetus for mediation in India. So mediation in India is the next big thing. And Bruce, you have seen that in India. You've seen it in the US. You've seen it in 25 different countries, maybe more, with through JAM, through Edwards Mediation Academy. So it would be fantastic to also hear from you what the global scene is looking like with respect to the practice of mediation.
Thank you, Tara, and congratulations on all the successes that you've carved out through camp. I know because I was there in the United States 30 years ago, how much patience and persistence it takes to really change an industry. And I encourage everybody to sort of think about the importance of what we're collectively trying to accomplish on those days where you feel frustrated or think that maybe, you want to be a parking lot attendant, or a school teacher or something different, because what we do is a noble profession, and bringing peace to, individuals and to the world is really, just the pinnacle of what we try and do. And so in the United States, you're right, 30 years ago, I left the practice of law. There was nothing called mediation. As I talked about earlier, I was trying to develop a process that was more aligned with my teachings in psychology and my common sense approach to conflict resolution than the legal standards available at the time. And when I left my law firm, my parents thought I was crazy, and I moved into a 1,000-square-foot office with my younger sister coming in at night and typing up letters, because in those days, that's what we did. And I started talking to anybody who would listen. And I started mediating disputes whenever I could find myself with an opportunity to intervene. And over time, we sort of scratched and clawed and developed, not just me, but many others, the whole concept of mediation. And to the point now where in law schools, we have, mediation courses taught. So the more progressive business schools and professional schools are also starting to add curriculum. We have teachers' colleges where teachers come out of getting their advanced degrees in education with a curriculum on dispute resolution that they take into their classrooms and helps students as young as 6, 7, 8 years old adopt yellow vests and go onto the playground and be peer mediators for their classmates' disputes outside of the classroom. And in 100 other ways are trying to implement mediation in our society. From a business standpoint, my company, we will do about 15,000 disputes this past year. We have about 400 mediators, many of whom are retired judges, unlike me. We have 26 offices around the country and probably have about $175 million in annual revenue. So we have a commercial success. At the same time, we're looking for ways to implement in the broader society these terribly important concepts. As I think broader beyond the United States, and as you know, I still think we have a long way to go in the United States. On a 10-point scale, I think we're probably somewhere around a 6.5. As you know, Tara, I've been to India 3 times, most recently last year teaching judges in Delhi. And tremendous things are happening in India, from the law change to the awareness of mediation to the opportunities through camp to intervene in commercial disputes. And again, no disrespect intended. This is just purely an objective view. You also have a long way to go, obviously, and which is great because there's fertile ground ahead. You might be closer to a 3 or a 3.5 on a 10-point scale in terms of the progress that you've made. Many countries around the world are just getting started. And I was just in the Republic of Georgia 2 weeks ago, and they've just implemented their first law. And they're still having problems getting lawyers and other stakeholders to buy into this process. And I met with the Minister of Justice and talking about ways to get the government behind this. I met with the Archbishop and trying to get the religious leaders to support this concept within other areas of society. And so next month I go to Brazil, probably the only country in the world that has a larger case backlog than India, frankly. And so the need is imperative in that country if they're going to get past basic issues of corruption. It really gets to the core of democracy, people's ability to have meaningful access to justice. I don't need to tell those of you, in India this story because it's evident. But if you're not getting an answer to your dispute for 7 years or 10 years, or God forbid your children are getting the answer for the dispute that you were in, that's not justice. And when you don't have access to justice, people do things like self-help and a variety of other things that are anathema to a true democracy and certainly to peaceful dispute resolution. And so a lot of the things that we're talking about and a lot of the countries we go to try and help implement mediation, this is the message. But what and the point I will leave you with is mediation is, as I had a professor at Harvard a month ago who I was interviewing tell me, he said, for millennium, we fought conflict through wars and armed combat. He said, we reached a point in our evolution where we developed a system of laws and justice. And for hundreds of years, we've been working through courts, sometimes better than in others, countries, but we at least have a more organized approach to dispute resolution. He said, I like to think that we're on the cusp of a third wave of dispute resolution technique and capability. And that's the ability to have thoughtful, conscientious dialogue with people that we're in conflict with and figure out ways to harmonize those conflicts and come to resolution. And so around the world, these conversations are taking shape. And yes, I've been in 20 or 25 countries, all aimed toward developing legislation, training mediators, balancing the need for the supply of trained mediators and the demand of mediation disputes. But the goal is the same. The goal is to advance our sort of human element to our highest possible capability. And all of the people on this phone call are part of that movement. So don't overlook the importance of what you're doing today and what you're doing generally. And as I say to many of my classes, there was a poet in 19th century America talking about the importance of patience and perseverance. And he wrote, long after the final no, there lies a yes. And on that yes, the future world depends. So in your coaching moments, in your dispute resolution moments and focus, don't overlook the tremendous importance of the goal that we're all seeking to achieve, which is helping people get on with their lives in a more productive, thoughtful, less conflict-ridden way. And you're all to be commended for your work in that area. But anyway, let me address questions. I think that's probably the next step.
Thanks, Bruce. I mean, very, very inspiring. And I think as coaches, at least as a coach in India, we are certainly on that journey, a very similar journey. And when you said noble profession, and when you talked about how much more there is, and there are a whole lot of us who've let go of other careers and moved on to coaching to be full-time coaches. And it's always not very encouraging. But I think what's important is the larger purpose and the larger role that we are playing as coaches and the kind of potential it can hold.
Absolutely.
Especially because I think coaching also as a domain is moving from a one-to-one kind of relationship with just one client to working with groups, with teams, with larger communities. And when I think the scope broadens so much, I think there will be challenges, and I think it's very important to equip ourselves and learn as we go.
I support that 100%, VG, and I'll just add to it this way. One of my passions in working with the International Academy of Mediators, which I'm a part of, they have mediators around the world, most of whom have been very successful in the commercial setting. And yet what I do at our conferences is I put on programs that are designed to challenge them to think more broadly, just as I hope coming out of today's conference call that your coaches will be challenged to think more broadly. Yes, we need to define ourselves in the individual moment. We need to develop our skills in that setting. But at the same time, we need to look for those broader opportunities within our communities, however it's defined. Right? Not everybody is going to be capable of solving, the India-Pakistan issues, right? But within your community, there are 100 different interventions that a skilled coach could look to intervene and assist people. And that's what I challenge people to do, is to take those skills that we're really talking about and trying to perfect and look for those ways to introduce them to broader groups through experience and through training others, because that's the only chance we have of this movement toward mediation rising to its highest potential.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, go on, Tara.
Virginia, I'm wondering, I would love to have time to do the case study, which I think is a compelling way to be able to get the audience to truly understand what we're talking about, and the conversation of how the mediation should and will transcend legal disputes is such a compelling conversation, as these are exactly the conversations that we are having as the mediation movement begins to rise in India. And hopefully we'll have another webinar where we can explore those ideas in much greater detail. But shall we take the next step on working with the case study?
Yeah,
and perhaps you can introduce that briefly.
Yeah, we should do that. Also, you know, this larger theme of addressing competencies and, you know, the similar threads. So what we'll do is we probably keep the case a little shorter. You know, we will just set out the case, maybe just get a, you know, few thoughts from Bruce. And I think after the webinar, people can write into us and, you know, just with specific queries about the case itself, because it is a caselet, it's hypothetical, of course, which will probably get dissected over the course of a couple of hours. And we're trying to do it within minutes, but I will certainly share my screen and let's just quickly have a look at the case. I'm assuming that most people here have, you know, can read their screens and not driving or something. But if there's a requirement, just type in the chat box and maybe one of us will quickly read the top lines of the case.
So just to give everyone a background, we've drafted up a quick scenario, a case scenario, which hopefully you can spend a minute or two reading. And the main character is Priya in this case study. We could spend a minute or two, or I mean, Vijay will kind of share her thought on how she would typically respond to Priya, were Priya to walk into her office. And followed by that, Bruce would also share with us how Bruce would perhaps typically respond to Priya should Priya walk into his office as a mediator. So just to be able to give the participants here an opportunity to get into the mind of a coach and get an understanding, which perhaps all of you are quite familiar with, on how a coach would respond to the situation, followed by getting an understanding of how Bruce as a mediator would respond to the situation, to help you understand the mediation process with a little bit more detail.
So
I guess.
Yeah, Ram, if you could just check the chat box whether anyone has an issue in readability of the screen. If somebody has an issue in readability.
Well, I have an issue in readability because I can see the first paragraph.
Yeah. So it's only the first paragraph.
Yeah,
so,
otherwise it should be clear to most people.
Okay. So maybe in about 10 seconds, I'll move to the second paragraph. Can I scroll down, Tara?
Yeah, stay there for a minute. Yeah. Yeah, it is going to be difficult for people to read this through, to be honest. I think some of them are having problems. So what you might like to do is to sort of put the essence of it and then carry on with the case study.
And I think that'll be suitable for my purposes as well, just to comment on what people have seen so far.
Right. So in a nutshell, this is a case scenario. It's a workplace dispute, which I thought most of us would be familiar with. It's about an employee with completely married to an organization, very sincere, very loyal, who's risen up the ranks, suddenly with no notice whatsoever, throwing in her papers. Her reporting relationship has largely been with the founder of the organization, who has now, for a while, become quite hands-off, owing to her health, by name Priya, and the name of the employee is Sarah. The reason that Sarah cited to Priya was the behavior of her son, Priya's son, who has stepped in Sarah's place and also direct boss of Sarah. And she has cited harassment as a reason. And clearly she has come in with a lot of emotion, and also at some level, the whole feeling of safety as an employee, she believes has been compromised. Sarah, given her own personal situation of her health and not knowing what to do, just accepted the resignation without discussing it with her son, Karthik. Karthik, when questioned later by Priya, completely shut her off and he just rubbished the whole episode. He was not really interested. Neither did he show a sensitivity or concern that somebody has raised an issue of harassment, nor was he interested in continuing the conversation. More so, he was keen to teach Sarah a lesson. Priya obviously, is a little concerned, and her biggest shock came in a couple of weeks. Once she came back, she'd gone for medical treatment. She received a lawyer's notice saying that Sarah is going to take them to court. So Priya approaches a common friend who's also an expert mediator, and Bruce will play that role here. And to wonder whether mediation can help her out of this mess. Priya obviously is also very concerned about the reputation of her brand, because in the preschool business, the brand reputation and the brand dimension of safety plays a very important role. Yeah, so I think a situation a lot of us, a lot of people from human resources would have faced, an employee just walking away. Now as a coach, and I'm sort of wearing the hat of a coach who is working with Priya one-on-one as a client, and not necessarily as a conflict coach, which is also something I do, but I'm going to keep that aside for a moment. My sense, and again, I've not had the goals, as we all know, as coaches will emerge only after the first few sessions. But my sense is that Sarah would probably want to work on this whole dimension of relationship, her relationship with her son, and also the relationship with an employee. She's also extremely concerned about her business. So some amount of business coaching would be involved there. And these are all seemingly the issues she comes up with as to how do I get out of this mess. Major part of the coaching, as we all know, the coaching is about the who. We coach the who on the what. And so major part of it will be to work with Priya on herself as a leader, on herself, on her own leadership ability, and again, a lot to do with probably the dynamics of what has happened with the business, entrusting it all to her son. I'm assuming that's where it'll go, but as any coach, it's very difficult to predict the outcome. But most of the coaching would be with Priya, on Priya as a person, exploring some of her own self-limiting beliefs, some of her own understanding of the situation, and a whole lot of her emotion. Bruce, I hand over to you.
Thank you. I was fascinated listening to an approach from a different perspective because we learn from each other. I love your metaphor about what hat you're wearing, because that's where every conversation needs to start. To answer the question, how to approach this is completely different if you have the hat of a coach, or you have the luxury of shining the spotlight on one and only one stakeholder. It would be a different hat to wear, for example, if you were the HR director for the company, being asked to come back and reach out to Sarah to try and see if you could entice her to come back to the company and deal with this dispute internally. I am looking at this from a mediator's perspective, and I have a mediator's hat on, which is a different approach. The first thing to keep in mind is when this issue or this dispute comes to me, it doesn't come in a nice format where all of the facts are laid out and people would say, Bruce, get involved. It would typically come to me with 1 or 2 sentences in the first paragraph as an introductory phone call. And so as a mediator, I have both the short-term view and the long-term view. Yes, my long-term view is starting to develop along the lines of what Vijay is suggesting. As I think about the relationship between the stakeholders, I think about what their interests might be. I think about where emotion is going to play a role in this. I think about, what kind of process I can convince people is going to make the most sense. But I'm very much in the convening stage, to go back to my chart. I'm very much in the convening stage at this moment. And in the long term, those are the things I'm starting to think about. But in the short term, we have to walk before we can run. What do I mean by that? I mean, I have to be able to get access to each of the stakeholders in the dispute and begin the delicate process of credentialing myself, developing credibility, developing intimacy, developing communication, and building the kind of bridge that you know so well in your individual moment. I have to think about how I will do that with every potential stakeholder in this dispute. The mom, the son, Sarah, maybe others, in a broader sense. And so one of the things, this is an aside, but an important one, I actually don't want to know all of this detail in my first conversation, because I'm already thinking I'm going to have a second and third and fourth conversation, at which point people are going to ask me, Bruce, what do you know about this dispute? And if I have to say, gee, I had a wonderful conversation with Sarah and I took 2 pages of notes and I've heard everything she has to say, before these people have even had a chance to meet me, you can appreciate what their reaction is going to be. It might range from slowing down my ability to connect with them to it might range to them saying, you seem to already have your thoughts made up on this and we'd rather talk about having another mediator. So I have to be very slow and methodical and cautious. And my very first step will simply be to call these other people and say, I've had contact with Sarah or through a mutual friend or even her lawyer, if lawyers are going to be involved, and they want to try and talk about mediation. I don't know anything about the facts yet, other than it's an employment dispute, but I'd like to talk with you now, Kartik or Priya or whoever I'm talking to, and slowly bring them into the process. The goal might be a conference call. The goal might be permission from everybody to engage in individual, more coaching type moments where everybody now knows that they're going to have the same opportunity to talk to me privately and develop the kind of information that's on this page. But I have to be very cautious and methodical in how I bring people into the process so that I can ultimately get to a moment where I can begin to explore all of the depth of emotion and factual background that's presented in this case study. And that's just in the convening phase, because I'm already starting to think, what's that opening going to look like? What are the parties' interests that I'm going to be trying to develop in negotiation? Where's emotion going to play out in that context? How am I going to communicate differently with Sarah than I might have to, with Kartik, for example, and 50 other considerations that are ahead for me in the mediation process. But that at least gives you a snapshot into how I would start to develop a conversation slowly, inviting people into the process, educating them about what it is, and ultimately trying to create what we call this environment of safety and hope, which is just another description for a vessel that we create where conversation can take place, whether that's face-to-face conversation or it's people situated across the hall initially, but a sense of safety and hope where we can start to develop these issues in a meaningful way, in a thoughtful way, in an emotionally authentic way that helps people move beyond the conflict. Those are the thoughts that are going through my head.
Bruce, what would be helpful is, I think, because of the fact that the case study is not fully understood by people, if you could sort of relate this to the process that earlier we set up, you had the 8 steps or whatever,
yes.
And in terms of even who the stakeholders are, because it could be confusing. I think Vijay, when she was explaining, I think there was a mix-up between Priya and Sarah in terms of who was who are probably in this case the stakeholders in mediation, and what in your opinion could perhaps be the interests, and what would be the process that could help people understand better.
Good, thank you for clarifying. So one of the things that I do in the convening process is I start to talk to people, and I actually physically write out a chart of the parties, the stakeholders, and their relationships to each other. Sometimes they're informal relationships, sometimes they're formal relationships based on employment or contract. So in this case, I would say, here's Sarah. She's obviously the person aggrieved. She's the ex-employee who's left the employment after years of good service and a strong relationship with Priya, who was her boss for most of that time. So that relationship is going to be the initial, relationship that I've identified. Then, of course, as I start to delve into conversations with Sarah, I find out that it's Kartik, Priya's son, who has been the hands-on administrator for the last several years due to Priya's poor health. And so he's the antagonist, the one who's literally sort of driven Sarah from her workplace and the job that she was committed to and enjoyed. So he's kind of another relationship on my grid or schematic of relationships. And then in private conversations with these people, I ask broad questions. For example, are there other people that are involved potentially in this dispute or should be involved in the decision-making process? Sarah, do you have a husband? Do you have parents that will support you, that you want to have be involved in this process and part of these conversations? Because I'm happy to include them. Similar conversations on the other side. There might be a board of directors for this company, of which Priya speaks for, but it would be helpful to have them at some point woven into the process. And so I'm initially in this convening stage, identifying all of these stakeholders, thinking about educating them about the mediation process and inviting them into the process itself. Metaphorically, physically, at some point, these people cross the threshold of my doorstep. They move from a convening stage into an opening stage. Again, I've previewed this with them in convening, but the whole conversation has been, what does this opening stage look like? How can I create this environment of safety and hope? Can I convince you to sit down at the table to have some degree of conversation? Or do we need to start separate and apart and look for opportunities to bring people together in different safe spaces? Because I could certainly envision, as we move into a negotiation conversation, a private conversation between Sarah and Priya that would probably be heartfelt with disappointment and emotion and tears potentially in this exchange. I could envision a very different kind of almost confrontational conversation were we to bring Kartik and Sarah into the same room, where she challenges him over inappropriate behavior and the things he's done to make her life miserable. And I could envision a different process altogether with everybody in the room, with Kartik sort of being in front of his mother, if not members of the board, where he's forced to listen to some of these accusations, worried about the impact it's going to have on his relationship with his mother and ultimately his employers. So all of these are moving pieces for me, and I need to strategize based on information from the parties, my own experience and intuitive sense, when and how to bring these people together in different stages to try and keep the conversation moving forward, to lance the wound, if you will. Sometimes you need to let the wound bleed a little bit before you can move on to a more healing stage. These are all things that I'm thinking about. And the interest, you're right, Ram, the interest, from Sarah, the broadest possible interests of what she wants to do, employment-wise, but really more importantly, those interests in terms of what she wants to say, both to Priya and ultimately to Priya's son in this context, so that she can feel good about herself, having taken responsibility for her own life, not having felt completely abused and unheard in this process. Those are all things I'm thinking about from Sarah's side. Kartik obviously is going to be a more challenging issue. What can I do both to get him to acknowledge the impact of what he's done, to take ownership and responsibility for his own actions? And is there an open-mindedness to learning from this experience from his standpoint? Or is he just going to be a stone wall, somebody who culturally or gender-wise or otherwise doesn't get it? In which case it drives me to have a different conversation with him and ultimately with his mother and the board of directors, depending on the outcome of those conversations. So these are all concepts around interest and emotions that will take shape in real time. And there's a tension in mediation always between being attentive to these big picture issues and then the moment-to-moment opportunities to manage these conversations. How do you sequence them? At what point do you let them continue? At what point, when emotion is ripe in the conflict, do you let it continue before you shut it off and feel like you've heard enough or people have engaged enough? These are the moment-to-moment skills that coaches and mediators really almost have to become fluid with in this process. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit more concretely about moving from the things in the convening moment to the things I'm thinking about in the opening session.
Yeah, Bruce, we have just about 5 minutes left, but what would be very appropriate is that element of forgiveness and apology that you had, which seems to be very, very appropriate in this particular case. If you could just touch upon that, and then we can close that because we don't have much time there.
Sure. So apology in dispute resolution is what we call sometimes the golden chalice or the holy grail. It really is the pinnacle of people's ability to appreciate that their actions, their behaviors, their words have caused somebody else injury or harm or disrespect. And so how one approaches apology in a dispute is a complicated conversation, because there are different types of apologies. We know that full apologies, when offered, are more often than not accepted. We know that incomplete or insincere apologies do more harm than good. We know that there's an issue of timing. When an apology is given can be as important as how it is given. And so, looking as a coach or a mediator for that optimal time to offer the apology is an important consideration. Who gives the apology? Is it in this instant ultimately, an apology coming from Kartik or from his mother, or will it be important to have apologies coming from both of them? These are all things that are wrapped up in the apology conversation. Forgiveness is a different animal altogether. Forgiveness is a very personal decision, sometimes tied in with one's religious or spiritual beliefs. One can't really coach forgiveness, but you can discuss it. But it falls under the heading of the right answer at the wrong time is still the wrong answer. Meaning, if people aren't ready to forgive, there's nothing you're going to be able to coach them or mediate them to. But you can talk about it, you can create the opportunity for it, but in the end, they've got to walk through that doorstep themselves. So a lot's written on apology and forgiveness. Fundamentally, it has a very important role in conflict resolution. Coaches and mediators should be attentive to those opportunities.
Thanks, Bruce. Unfortunately, we just have about a couple of minutes left. So let me wrap it up at this point in time. Sorry, Vijay, sorry, Tara. I don't think there's too much time now. This has been a great session, but the topic is so vast and there have been so many different questions on how coaching approach and so on and so forth. I don't think it's possible to cover it in just one session. It has to be over several, and which is why the whole process is being treated as a separate mastery webinar for training people, especially coaches, in the mediation process. And again, while many of you are very, very keen on how the coaching process applies, this is also something we are looking at as a possible business opportunity for coaches. This may or may not interest all of you, but may certainly interest some of you who would like to develop coaching into other application skills, as it were. And that is where Bruce comes in the way of his training, and Tara and camp and so on. So what we are planning to do is to sometime early next year, make this an offer, and those who are interested will come in here. And we do understand that this is not a pure coaching, knowledge gathering session or a wisdom gathering session in coaching, but it is an application kind of a session. We still have about a minute each. So if each one of you as panelists would like to check out, and all I would say is please give your feedback to Magda and I, and you can also post on forum any questions that you have. Yes. Now, Vijay, Bruce, and Tara, if you could just say your final advice.
I'd like to at this point introduce everyone to the fact that Coacharya, EME, and CAMP are working towards providing a 70-hour program where 40 hours of online instruction along with 30 hours of facilitated live facilitation to help you unpack all of these issues, many more of these topics that Bruce has just introduced. We're hoping to launch this sometime early next year. To reach out to Magda and to Coacharya if you're interested. I think these are skills that would not only help you in your coaching career, but Vijay and Ram have pointed out, it could certainly pave the path for you to be able to take the next step or take another step as a mediator. It's a fantastic program. Bruce is the lead instructor and brings in also the collective wisdom of many other highly experienced mediators. So it's a fantastic opportunity, learning experience that we encourage all of you to learn more about, and Coacharya and Magda are happy to do that.
Thanks, Tara. What I want to leave everyone with is I've learned as much today just listening in, and thanks to all the fantastic questions. I know we've not done justice to those, and I certainly know we've not covered this interplay between coaching and mediation skills and competencies. I'd like to offer, till such time the program gets off the ground, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd be very happy to chat about what I see as the parallels between the coach's hat and the mediator's hat, and maybe some of the differences too. It's been an exciting ride for me, and I hope a whole lot of you would join me in this, because it's a wonderful world out there to explore with so much of synergy. Thank you.
Thank you all for just this tremendous opportunity to be in front of you and share thoughts and ideas and learn from each other. I don't take for granted people's investment of time in learning and learning new ideas, and I'm humbled by your gift of time to me this morning. It is a wide world. What we do is so important in affecting our futures. And I'll just leave you with one final thought, which is whether you're learning skills to become a better coach or you're learning skills to become a better mediator, in learning those skills, you can't help but become a better person. And so whether your motivation is professional or it's personal, you'll realize success in a variety of ways as you move further and deeper in this direction. So I wish you all well. I am a resource for people, as Tara and others know. If there are things I can do to help you along your journey, I'm only a few clicks away. So thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, Vijay. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Good night.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks, Tara. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.